Backlights here, so if anybody in the audience wants this. Hey,
Just switch.
I appreciate it.
Right here, isn't it?
Well, only one of the buttons was. So the conversation tonight we wanted to have was about getting a little bit more detail and clarity to developers that come through Darden Prairie for the purposes of development. So currently we have our 2020 comprehensive vision plan, about 78 pages, about 50 pages really of plan, about 20 pages of appendices, maps.
Can you speak up a little bit or turn the any mics on? Okay,
Can you hear me?
not on. Magic
Screaming at
button on the-
Oh. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about vision planning, specifically for the corridor between Town Square Boulevard or Town Square Avenue, between Bryan Road and Technology or 64, right where the Town Square development is. So last meeting, we had a conversation about the 10 acres at corner of Post Road and Town Square and what we would envision that property to be. Out of that conversation became a larger question that some of the aldermen brought up and something that has been a continual concern as we talk about developments like at Mers Farm Lane, which is having a cohesive strategy for development and not leaving any parcels undeveloped or underdeveloped, that as proposals come through, that there is a cohesive plan that is inclusive for developing that entire corridor. We would hate to see somebody come in, throw in a project that isolates a lot or isolates a piece of property from being developed or underdeveloped in the future. So part of the conversation for the Town Square conversation, part of the Post Road 10 acres conversation led into a bigger question that I asked, which was, what is our vision really for all of Town Square Avenue? What are the things that we would like to see, and not just broad uses? Obviously, our 2020 vision plan has a future land use map. And part of that map shows broadly the types of uses we would like to see. So I come down here to this appendices. It talks about what the existing land uses are here in Darden Prairie. And then we also have a map that shows what we would like to see our future land uses be. But that doesn't tell us a lot if we're talking broadly about just commercial. If we're talking about the types of commercial we would like to see, we're talking about residential or the types of residential we'd like to see, the use and the uses within the commercial that we're talking about. If we look just at our, here we go. If we look just at our zoning code, obviously there are probably uses in C1 or C2 or C3 that we'd like to see, some that we would not like to see, but leaving it strictly zoned as a, in this case, for instance, along Technology, that was previously zoned as the Uptown zoning district. When we got rid of the Uptown zoning district, we identified that as the new development district. And I believe it's along that corridor, it's considered the use is what would be in C3. But it still doesn't tell us much about what we'd actually like to see there. For instance, under the PUDs, C3 would include potentially multifamily. That what we would like to see there? Are we looking for multifamily to be part of a larger development, for instance, a mixed use development like we see at the Prairie? Are we looking at high-tech manufacturing? There are broad discussions of this in the comprehensive plan, but there is not a detailed plan for what we are trying to per se encourage there, the development that we would like to see infrastructure wise from the city for our investments. For instance, we have a significant amount of money right now that is from the ARPA funds, from the American Recovery Act funds. This gives us a significant amount of potential capital investment that we could make in our city to bring in and incentivize developments throughout these corridors. You'll also see some of these areas here along Town Square and Post. These were previously identified as commercial corridors. And then we have, again, our 10 acres here on Post. You probably can't really see the mouse very well. You know, we have that listed as public, institutional, or park. We need to have a process that is not only detailed, in which we tell our development community what it is we like to do, and by the way, what the city is willing to do to help, whether that's improving our infrastructure investments, multimodal transit, whether it's trails, bike lanes, walking trails, etc. Whether that's something that we would expect of them, because as we develop along that corridor, if we're talking about piece by piece, those properties being developed, are we looking at making sure we have each development submit either for part of a trail or part of a sidewalk or some other sort of multi-use path? Is it important for us to connect areas like Wyndham Meadows and other communities in the Prairie, and even the areas over here in O'Fallon, here south near Winghaven, to connect again through maybe multimodal means over to Town Square to help the Town Square development improve their customer base? These are all the questions we really need to ask. We need to not just ask these of ourselves, we really need to ask these of our residents. Part of the problem I think that we're having right now over at Bryan Road and Fisey with the Prairie Encore development is that there is a lack of understanding both from the residents in that area about what the expectations have been for some time for development on that corner, but there also hasn't been a lot of engagement. So when you look at what a lot of other communities have done, especially when it comes to just their comprehensive plan, one of the things that I've noticed, and I've taken some time to solicit from some of our other neighboring communities, what their comprehensive plans are. So Lake St. Louis, our neighbor to the north and west, not a lot bigger than the city of Dardenne Prairie, something the mayor and I talked about the other day. They have 208 pages of very detailed vision and comprehensive plan that talks about not just future land use and broad conditions within the city, but first they talked about a very detailed process that they engaged in for bringing the community involved in the planning process, getting their input. Part of that process is not just getting input from residents. That is extremely important, but that process also educates residents about what we're doing and why. When they see the final product, they're not wondering how you got there. They're not wondering, well, I gave my opinion and they just must have ignored me. Part of that process is educating residents as to why we need to engage in certain types of economic development activities. So some of those things are very lacking in our comprehensive plan. And by the way, I'm not suggesting we redo our comprehensive plan, though I think the mayor has pointed out previously there are serious, I think, deficiencies in our comprehensive plan. But as we look just specifically about Town Square Avenue, Post Road, and Technology, those three roads are the most open and available properties for development in Dardenne Prairie. And we do know that there are people who are interested, just as we talked about the 10 acres on Post and Town Square. We do know there's people interested in developing in those areas. The constant question we get is, well, what do you want to see there? And so when we talk about this broadly, if you look at our comprehensive plan now, I would argue that I don't know that some of it is cohesive in the sense that we have an issue with a corridor which started off to be a commercial corridor, Town Square Avenue, which now under our current vision plan shows it to be mostly residential. We don't have this corridor between a main drag here on Bryan Road and the Town Square development, Burris Farm area, we don't have this commercial corridor that was originally planned. We have, right now, they have it listed basically as just single family at that, residential. Now, is that the highest and best use for that land? I don't think so by far. I don't know that it's the highest and best use for both for supporting further development along that corridor. I don't know that it's the highest and best use for just helping Darden Prairie in that throughout that entire corridor grow. We've talked about the need for adding rooftops, talking about single family detached. We're not really talking about many rooftops, but we're also talking about if we're trying to pull developer or pull economic activity off of Bryan Road or over from Lake St. Louis, we really need to focus on what we could do along that corridor to breathe life into the Town Square development. Currently, we have this property over here on Merce Farm Lane. Obviously, that property has been sitting vacant for a long time. We do know that St. Louis Bank, who owns it, is very, very anxious, I would say, would be the right word, to do some sort of development there. What that development is, obviously, we've had conversations with them, but we need to have a conversation, I think, not just between this board, but with the community about what should go there, specifically what it is the city would be interested in putting there, and what the city would be willing to do to partner either with a developer or to help further redevelopment of the let's just say underutilized areas. There's some vacant properties, but there's also a car lot. There's also a gas station, which unfortunately, when Highway N was raised to go over 64 there, it's more or less cut off from a lot of the traffic activity along Highway N there. The ZX gas is, of course, what I'm talking about. Certainly, I think an underutilized space, we know that the owners there have even mentioned that they currently one of their most underperforming stores. So how can we help redevelop that area there, also the empty spaces, and then move that development down Technology? What does that look like? I think the mayor had sent out also a interesting article in Mid Rivers News Magazine recently that talked about the I-64 corridor and what originally had been planned for I-64, which is some of the high-tech manufacturing and logistics along that corridor, and how much of that has actually been developed over the last 20 years. And I think in O'Fallon alone, from their absorption study that they did, they looked at it. I think they were only doing like 5 acres a year or something like that for the last 20 years. Basically, this corridor is it's not going to develop before I'm dead at the rate of development for what it was originally planned for, that I-64 high-tech manufacturing logistics corridor. So, and keep in mind, most of that development, by the way, is much further down in O'Fallon and maybe even down toward our Weldon Spring Road and Technology corridor. So what would be the best? What exactly is the use that we should be looking at between Post Road and Merce Farm Lane along Technology? What is the look and feel of Post Road between Technology, Town Square? What is the look and feel, and what is the city infrastructure that we need to talk about putting in to encourage and incentivize development between Bryan Road and Town Square, Schnucks, Target, etc.? These are conversations that I think we need to have. I think it's a conversation that we need to have through a process that engages stakeholders. You look at what other communities do, and I'm talking about communities from Ferguson, where I came from, to Lake St. Louis. We're talking about a process that reaches out and engages stakeholders, has numerous open meetings, surveys, but also pushes out that information as to why we might need to do development maybe in a certain way. What is the city's goals as a municipality? What do we have to do? We have to maximize some ways our revenues for sales tax, or we are going to have to at some point shift to a property tax to help fund city functions. What is the long-term outlook for revenues? What is the long-term outlook if we build additional subdivisions and the cost and liabilities that that brings to the city? Every time we build a new subdivision, every one of those streets is quite frankly unsustainable with the taxes brought in by that subdivision. No point in any of our lifetimes is the amount of money raised in property taxes, any of our subdivisions paying for the streets to be fixed in those subdivisions. Just not sustainable. And we know that because that's how we went out for our sales tax, for our transportation sales tax, and that's why we went out, of course, for our bond issue as well. So having a conversation with our residents about that, having a conversation with our business owners and the landowners along that corridor, I think is very important. It would be important for us to know what landowners are looking to sell, which ones are maybe selling pretty soon. I think we were taken off guard recently that there's a couple that have been put up for sale right there next to Wyndham Meadows. I know there's been a couple people who've already reached out. What would the city allow to go on that lot? I don't really know what to tell them other than to say, give us a proposal and we'll tell you maybe yes or no. Well, I think we've already talked about this before. Those proposals are very expensive. And I think it does developers a disservice. And I think it does our residents a disservice not to be more clear in articulating of what it is that not only our vision, not only your vision as a board, but the residents' vision for the greater community is for that corridor. So what I'm asking for the board is, I've sent you guys some documents already about what some other communities have done. I've found some more since then. I'm happy to give them to you. And I'll send those out to you. What I'd like from the board is to commit to going through a process where, and this will certainly engage outside help, whether that's PGAV or somebody else, to help us engage stakeholders, engage the community, find out about that corridor, the information necessary for us to have a public conversation with our residents about what that corridor should look like, what we as a community should probably commit to doing in that corridor, whether that's trails, community amenities, parks. We talked about amphitheaters. We talked about all kinds of things over at the 10 acres. And then using that again to market to developers. This is exactly what we want to see here. This is what you should be bringing to us. There's not really any question about what we want now. This is exactly what we're looking for. I think right now, if we had that, we would see a lot more, not just interest, but we'd actually see some very good proposals coming to the city to get that land developed. So with that, I'd like to entertain any questions from the board about process, cost, or
Yeah, so
what they feel.
James, yeah, it's one of my questions, and I don't know if you reached out, if you just took a look at what they were doing. Generally speaking, though, if you have reached out to any other cities, how long of a process did this take them as they were working through it?
Sure. So Lake St. Louis, part of the plan that I did show here from Lake St. Louis, when they did their comprehensive plan, and I think I'll point back to the appendix here. One of the things that they did is like this chapter 7, and I brought this up to the mayor. Notice that they used the term uptown district. They stole that from us, I guess, after we abandoned it. They're going to go through their own uptown plan. So part of their master plan, or part of their comprehensive plan, actually does include kind of a chapter that's very detailed about how they would like to, and I'll stick to that. Their uptown plan talks of, again, specifically, and it's very, I don't want to say it's quite as new urban as our plan was, but I wouldn't go through their whole project like they did because we've already done it. But if we took just like this corridor here on Lake St. Louis Boulevard that they're talking about, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about carving out a section, town square, maybe technology too, and engaging in 3-month process, reaching out, property owners, business owners, residents in the area. Obviously, Planning and Zoning Commission would be an extremely important part of this. Having members of the board also being part of this. Because obviously we're talking about surveys, and when they did their citizen engagement, both And I talked to Brentwood. I was involved in them in Ferguson. Ferguson just redid theirs a couple years ago. Same as us, Lake St. Louis. You're talking about social media, outreach through social media, mailers, public spaces. I mean, anything they can do. They even reached out to the schools in many cases. We're talking about a much scaled down version of that. So three or so months of outreach, engagement, planning. We have a lot of data that we've already accumulated through our comprehensive planning process, but really it's more about the public conversation and the internal conversation about we got to start making some decisions about what we'd really like to see along this corridor. We started that conversation already about the 10 acres, but it's completely appropriate to have a conversation about property that's not the city's, because what we want is we want that to be cohesive throughout the corridor. We don't want to put if we followed the comprehensive plan right now, we're talking about putting an entertainment venue potentially, the 10 acres across the street from a bunch of single family homes. I don't know that they'd really want that. I mean, I don't know that if I bought some single family little residential subdivision they're going to throw in over there at the corner of Post Town Square at the other side. We're talking about building an amphitheater across the street with pickleball courts and concerts and parties on Friday night. They may not really like that because, I mean, that's not really a cohesive plan. I think we already said that's what we would like that's part of what we talked about for the 10 acres. But then when you started to flush out what we would like on the 10 acres, it really doesn't fit in with the rest of the land use plan on the corridor. So we need to talk about how all that needs to be more cohesive and how that all needs to gel together. If we're talking about properties individually, it's real easy to say, well, I'd like that there. I'd like that there. Well, what about this whole corridor? Oh, well, maybe it doesn't all fit together anymore.
I think going through a process is a good idea. So
one note that I would make, we've had a lot of outside engagements over the years, and plans and studies, things like that. And not all of them land where we do. And I can count many of them that there's questions about applicability or how much effort was really put into them, things like that from these vendors or process as a whole. If we do this, I think we should. I'd really like to see purposeful engagement from board members in there. I don't know if it rises to the occasion of creating an actual commission to do something like this. I would be open to it. But I think that something like this needs a lot of hands, a lot of eyes, a lot of concentrated effort. I agree. I think it's important.
So typically we would start off with a steering committee, and that would probably be, a couple aldermen, a couple members of the planning and zoning, including the chairman, potentially a couple business owners, a couple property owners in the area, a couple residents, just to steer the conversation, steer the effort, so that this is not something that is, we don't want to buy someone could argue that, some of the stuff we've done in the past could have been like, you go to a consultant, they give you they come in, they tell you what's great, what would fit for everything, and then that's what you're given. I don't think that's what you want here, and it's going to not build the community engagement or the community momentum that you want. I think one of the things that we have right now that is really important is we have people who are engaged and interested because of what's going on at the boat property. And even though this isn't as close to their properties, even though this probably has much less impact on them directly than obviously the boat property, but we have people right now who are interested and engaged in what's going on in the community and how the community is developing and going forward and why. The why is part of that important conversation too. Why is the city interested in doing this? Why do you think that works? Not just from the city's perspective or the perspective of potentially a consultant, but property owners and developers, all who should be part of that process. It wouldn't be, wrong to have a developer again as part of that steering committee. Talk about what would bring someone like them to invest in our community, because it is an investment. So that's where we would start. And then the engagements, if you look at whether it's Lake St. Louis, or Ferguson, or Manchester, or any of those other places, well, Brentwood along Manchester Road, they had 4 or 5 town hall conversations, focus groups, certain neighborhoods, bring people out, get them to actually engage. You can't just put it out there on the Post-Dispatch and say, we're having a public hearing, show up if you want to talk about the comprehensive plan. Like, it has to be an engagement. It can't just be, we did what was required by state law. We posted it 15 days ahead of time, twice. Thanks. So part of the first step is going to be building what that process would look like, who's going to help lead it, and then move forward with what that actual framework would be. If you look at any of these plans, they start out by having a conversation about what the strengths and weaknesses and threats are, SWOT analysis, more or less, to that area. And not just to that area, but to Dardenne Prairie as a whole. I mean, we have a lot of strengths, might have some weaknesses. We do have threats. One threat that we talk about regularly is finances. We are in great financial shape. We are heavily sales tax dependent. If we lose a major retailer, our finances suddenly would flip on its head. Obviously, we've talked about things like inflation. We've done a tremendous amount of infrastructure improvement. 3 years ago, when you guys started that process, concrete was half or less than it is today. What we've thought we could do with the money is certainly a lot less than it has been. We still will do now and will need in the future additional revenues to continue to offer up to the residents the level of services they want and they require. And we also want to keep the tax burden on individual residents as little as possible. Economic activity is what will help continue to fund those services so we can offer a high level of services to our residents while maintaining a relatively low, on Dardenne Prairie's part. I know you all pay a lot in taxes, but Dardenne Prairie's portion is this $4,000 tax bill on your real estate taxes. About $70 of that goes to Dardenne Prairie. So these are the things that people will understand through this process, through that engagement. I think that's probably the most important part about engaging in this.
I just want to say, I want to thank you for together, because this is exactly what I asked for. I asked Alderman meeting. And hit the nail on the head is forward. We are landlocked. We don't have a lot of land to develop. We have to build a corridor that's going to bring revenue to sustain this city as it is. We need to bring people in from other surrounding cities. Along with that, it's exactly what the residents are asking for. High-end restaurants, places to entertain, stuff like that. So this corridor that we're talking about is ideal for it. Whether we have to go ahead as a city and start buying up the properties ourselves or whatever, when they come up for sale to control them, that might be one way of doing it. But I think we need to move forward. So I guess what I'm going to be asking of you next to bring to us is that steering committee or whatever type committee we need to put together to move forward on this. I think the majority of the board's in agreement, moving with in the committee together.
So ultimately, this is not something we budgeted for. So obviously, this is going to be something we'll come back and have a conversation about a budget amendment. Don't ask me what the cost is going to be. Again, this is going to be a very directed effort. This isn't going to be a complete redo of the comprehensive plan. That's not the goal here. But we will need to have a conversation with planning and zoning about wanting to make sure that this all still fits in with the comprehensive plan. So if this conversation leads to planning and zoning making modifications of the comprehensive plan, then it probably should. But again, it'll be because the process leads it there, because the citizen engagement, the engagement with property owners, engagement with owners, business owners along that corridor will lead it to that point, and then we'll have that conversation. I think the next step would be to try and put together a framework, and we can talk about this over the next week or so, of what that steering committee would like to look like. I don't think you would want to make it too huge, but you want to try to make it inclusive as possible. Then from there, we'll have a conversation about an RFP to engage in a professional to help us lead this effort. Somebody who's going to hold the town halls, someone who has experience with the engagement, the citizen engagement, And then obviously also has the technical expertise to help us navigate what is appropriate for that corridor and what's not. And so we'll start obviously with that citizen engagement, getting that information, getting that those concerns and opinions from the residents, but then moving towards also that educational part. So this is what residents would like. This is what business owners would like to do. Here's what's realistic along that corridor, and here's maybe how we can make that work. So
One thing I'd like to see on this and getting the public's engagement on this is to have maybe meetings during the day and in the evenings.
absolutely.
So a lot of the elderly folk that can't come out in the evening.
Sign elder.
You know,
Two day-
come during the day, people have activities at night, they can't come at night, maybe they can come during the day, but then having another one in the evening. So, I'm more than willing to help.
One of the big concerns that we always hear from people is that they come to these meetings and they expect an engagement. This would certainly be an engagement. This would not be a public hearing where somebody comes up and they give their opinion and then we write it down and we thank them for them coming up here. This would be conversation. This would be, and at best, there would be engagements where we could get on the, get everybody's input, but we would also go down to have small, I would envision small group meetings where 20 people, not 200 people, are having a conversation about groups of 20, having conversation about what they think and feel about that corridor, how it should look, what their concerns are. A lot of it would be about getting people's concerns and then having a conversation about how we can address those concerns. A lot of times people may be against something because they have a fear or concern with something. Obviously, there's things that we could possibly do to allay those concerns, mitigate them as best as possible. But it doesn't have to always be a zero-sum game. I think sometimes that's always the fear.
And you're not gonna please everybody, but you're gonna have a consensus of the majority of people and an understanding of why we're looking to do what we want to do, or the group is looking to do. So it's just not there, it's an understanding of why we're putting it.
So what I'm going to ask is the board think about individuals or groups that you want represented as part of the steering committee. And then I'm going to reach out to John B. At least he's somebody that we've got a relationship currently and have been working with in the past to talk about what that scope of work would be and what that RFP would look like for something this size.
Our comprehensive plan really was put together by John B. There was very little input from planning and zoning. Planning and zoning's charged to do it, but it was very limited as to who actually added to that. So it was basically John B. putting that together. I have a lot of confidence in what he says. He's a brilliant man. He's been in that industry for a long time, knows what he's talking about. But he knows us. He's been with us for probably 6 or 7 years, maybe 8 years. Do we need to bring somebody in that doesn't know us, that looks at it differently?
Well, I would certainly expect us to go out to an actual RFP or an RFQ process for the person who will help lead us through this effort. Because we have the relationship with John B. and I've already spoken to him about this, and he helped me actually go out and find, when I told him what I was interested in, he helped me go look at other cities and said, you should look at this city, you should look at this city. So look at Ferguson. I said, I know it. I remember because we did 3 of these when I was there for our downtown area. But I'll talk to him a little bit more about the scope, but honestly, I think we need to, you're right. I think we need to look at other people that might have a fresher look at things. And I'm not saying that John B, what he says in here isn't academically correct, right? But what I've seen from reading through other comprehensive plans and other processes is, I didn't want to throw anybody under the bus, but you brought it up, Dave, so I'm going to say it. This comprehensive plan did not engage the residents to define what the future of Garden Prairie should look like. And so when we hold up the comprehensive plan to say, this is what P and Z says, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to hold developers to, at the end of the day, it's like, why? Because we paid a guy to tell us what we should do. He is smart and he's not wrong probably on what will work and what won't work, but what they think and feel matters a lot. So how do we bring those two together? How do we find out what our residents think and feel is what they want with what will work? And then marry those two together. And then that should be the plan. So I agree. I think ultimately we may go with somebody else, but we'll see what we get as far as proposals. But it will certainly be I think an RFP or an RFQ process. I'll talk to John Young about what we think is probably most appropriate legally, but certainly want to try to get some new blood and certainly a new tactic going forward on how we do this.
And the comprehensive plan to me is fluid and changes however we feel it needs to change. When I say we, I'm talking about planning and zoning. But John B's thinking, I've seen some of the things he put together, and it's been a little bit of cut and paste where I know he does work for Clayton. We're not Clayton.
Right.
And it's cut and paste, and even some of the rules and regulations that he had in there, no vinyl siding. Well, 90% of Jordan Prairie is vinyl siding, or at least the new housing stock is. So
Right.
there's, but I think the comprehensive, what I was going, needs to be fluid and changeable. And it needs to flow with what we're talking about.
I appreciate that. And I think that in the future, when we have a public hearing on a PUD, the idea would not necessarily be that we have a lot of people showing up either surprised or angry at what we're doing, that we would have already an understanding of what the concerns are of residents, the feelings are of residents, and that the goals of the city are. Hopefully, future proposals won't go through what we're going through now, like the Pope property. Hopefully, in the future, at least as far as the town square corridor goes, because that's obviously the area that we're talking about focusing on. But I think that area with it, especially with it being so open, several big open lots, several of them are for sale. Obviously, the open lots across from Town Square, the Town Square development, the actual commercial development there, all of that, which needs to have some life breathed into it. We know that there's people that have for years been trying to do something there. We know right now there are owners who are actively trying to get something to happen on that property. So I think it's important for us to get moving on that as quickly as possible, give them that direction.
That I think is important to consider as we're doing this, and maybe it fits into like the SWOT analysis piece of it is, the opportunities. I think that if we talked about slip ramp off of 64, and that's a game changer for what we're talking about right here.
Yeah.
So, do we form a steering committee for that too, to actually reach out, to legislatures and people in the government to try to make something like that happen? Because, we could end up doing something here that maybe doesn't serve us in the best way if we don't take that into account.
Absolutely. Transportation. Well, when I mentioned infrastructure, transportation is a key part of that. Dave brought up before about Mers Farm Lane. Does that need to be there in the future? How would that look? There's a lot of conversations about however that would develop. How would we change our infrastructure investments to support that development, or rearranged or moved Mers Farm Lane, or added a different road to cut through? However it would be. The slip ramp, I know for many years, if you look back, I don't think I've seen anything but slip ramp off of 64 onto Technology, at least in the files that I've looked at. There is, if you look right there, just across from Petco, north of Target, there's right of way that was clearly purchased by MoDOT, and I guess for the potential to have a dump out off of 64 before you go on to 364. You head 64 west and you're going to 364 east. It could dump right there onto Technology, no problem. MoDOT owns the land, but to your point, it's not there. But if it was there, maybe that's the infrastructure that we need to put in. It's a total game changer, like you said, for that. And I think something like this might identify that. Absolutely.
Yes, I think that being a part of it, and then also, when you showed that map earlier, and when you look at the parts of the city that are incorporated versus those that are outside of city boundaries. Which of those properties are already incorporated into another city and which are unincorporated and could possibly become a part of Darden Prairie through annexation? I don't know, just by looking at that, what south of Town Square is available and what's not available.
So actually, this map, because we had the annexation of Rodens, this spot right here, the last large spot, that's actually now in Darden Prairie. So we actually do control everything outside of Keystone Crossing there. From the back of that house on Keystone Crossing all the way over is now Darden Prairie. So we control that development, and have the ability to help shepherd that along.
What about the stretch between Post and Bryan?
So this I don't remember not being incorporated. There is a small piece right here. It's not incorporated. There's a couple houses back there and it's like a random street.
I'm talking about the stretch up in between, Post Road.
It's in O'Fallon, it's
It's
O'Fallon.
all O'Fallon.
Oh, this right here. Yeah, that's all of Fallon. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Keystone.
that's Keystone Crossing. So yeah, there's a street off the Post and then down here off of Town Square. Oh, I'm sorry. That's unincorporated.
Unincorporated.
Yeah, that part is unincorporated.
That would be something.
One,
Well-
they don't want us because they don't want to pay $50-$60 in taxes. Can't afford to pay rates.
So we've already got the people there. They can shop in our stores and pay for our taxes, but
Exactly.
we don't want to fix their streets, to Dave's point. That's absolutely right. They can enjoy it like they live in Darden Prairie. We don't have to fix their street.
Okay, in the interest of time,
All right. So we'll continue this conversation offline. I would like any input if you guys have residents, business owners, landowners, people that you would like to identify as someone we could reach out to, have a conversation with about a steering committee. Obviously, before we start offering people to join, we'll have a conversation between all of us about what, size and who we're talking about. And then I'll get working right away on RFP, RFQ on a consultant and try to get some ideas also on what both scope of work and what cost might be for this very directed vision plan for Town Square. And by the way, just so I know, for scope purposes, we've talked about Town Square, but I think we've talked about the importance of both post and technology. Would the board like that to be part of it? I think because you look at the old Uptown plan, that was all part of it, right? It was the whole triangle there, but then also up a little bit to Feisty and down. I think it's important with what we're trying to do at Murray's Farm, what we might be trying to do at Post and Town Square, to also know what we want to see on technology, because whatever that goes there is certainly could possibly be congruent with a larger plan. All right, I'll make sure that's the scope. I'll send it out to everybody, and then you guys have ideas of people we'd like to talk to.
I'll be happy to work on this free of charge.
All right.
okay, I just.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I'd also like to,
I don't get paid.
for the record, note that I'd like business owners to be engaged in this also, even though they do not live in Darden Prairie. That's exactly right, and I appreciate that, but I mean, there's several businesses. Okay, so, thank you, James. I want to say I